Namaste, everyone. Very excited to be here. This was a fabulous session that we just had, and I wanted to thank everybody for joining. We are going to have a very interesting discussion, I think, with some of the people who are actual survivors of the incidents that we just heard described about. It is a very emotional discussion. The losses that we are going to hear about are as personal and fresh today. The memories are as raw as they were on that fateful week 31 years ago. I'm going to take a minute to introduce all of them. But before we start, I just I want to thank everybody again for being here. This, as we talked about this discussion and this panel, there were some very raw emotions, and if those come through today, we ask for your forgiveness. But this is very personal to everybody on the panel. So today we have Dr. Shefalika Ban Kotwal. She is based in UK, and she was in her 20s when this exodus happened. And she also has she's a psychiatrist by background, and I'm very interested in hearing her perspective on these stories because, as we have discussed in the earlier panel, there is a lot of intergenerational trauma. There is a lot of hidden trauma that comes through in the years and decades that follow after an incident like this. We also have Ruchi Kola, who is based in the Bay Area and works in the technology industry. She was a teenager when the horrific events of 1990 happened. And then we have Nirja Sadhu Kaul, who was also had to leave Kashmir in that fateful year. She was based in Srinagar and was in her 20s and has very interesting perspective of being a college student, as well as Amrita Kar, who's our youngest panelist and was 4 when this exodus happened. And while you might think a 4-year-old is innocent and protected, she was unfortunately still caught up in this, and even the innocence of childhood could not save her. And we also have Swapna Energy, who is an active Kashmiri refugee and activist. So, without ado, I would just like to start. We heard the stories of 1990. The mysteries are fresh, but I would love to just start with a quick what stands out for you from that era, then and now. So maybe Shafalika ji, you can start.
Inviting us. Well, you talked about our memories of that time. So I was 18-year-old then, and there are some things which stand out. I mean, there is a commonality in what we all will say, but there are some things which are very specific to each one of us. So I will discuss what was specific about that night to me in particular. And of course, the general theme here is of terror and feeling vulnerable and traumatized. And 31 years later, the story is still the same. So 1990, January 19 was a very traumatic night for us. And we were all in different stages of our life. I was 18, somebody was a teenager, somebody was very young. Uh, but the trauma was the same for all of us. So if I tell you my own memory of that particular night, I'll start off with that. It was a normal night. I was 18. I still remember I was watching a movie on TV, and my parents were sleeping. It was just the three of us in the house, and suddenly you imagine an 18-year-old just watching TV, and outside there was this blaring of the loudspeakers from the local religious places. And I couldn't make the head and tail of what's going on. And then I looked out of the window and I saw our house was slightly away from the main road. But when I looked at the main road, we saw all these crowds of people. They were chanting slogans. And some of them were holding, what we call as mashals in India, and torches and lanterns. And I was thinking, what is going on? What is happening? I couldn't make out at that point what they were saying. So I woke my parents up and I said, something is happening. Just wake up. So we all looked out of the window. And then by that time, we were able to make some head and tail of what the slogans were. And your colleague said earlier, it was things like relive, saliv the gully, which means, convert, die, or or just join us. So things like that, and things like Indian dogs go back. There were a lot of very anti-Indian slogans at that time, and things like we want Kashmir with the Pandit women and but without the Pandit men. So I remember being totally shocked because I had never heard these slogans before, and then to see a mass of hundreds of people actually on the main road saying all these, you can imagine what it does to an 18-year-old girl. So, and then the phones started ringing, the landline, and people were saying this is happening across the whole town, across whole of Srinagar and across the whole Kashmir. So the same scenario was being replicated, if in all the main streets of Srinagar, and that just totally panicked us. And I remember my parents, my aunt, she lived next door, so my parents said, "Let's lock the house and just let's go to her, and at least we'll be five or six of us together." So we went to her house, and the thing I really want to say here is, which I vividly remember, we were sitting on her balcony. We were all very traumatized, all men, children, old people. And then one of my cousin's wife, she was crying, and I asked her, "Why are you crying?" And she said, "Do you know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of 1947, when the Kabalis raid." So we had, in 1947, we had events when Kabalis from across the border raided Kashmir. They couldn't reach Srinagar because they were stopped by the Indian army on the way. But she started crying, saying this is how it started then, because her family had been killed at that time, her grandparents, I think. And she said, this is how it starts. So you have these mobs, and then suddenly they will enter the homes and people will be killed, and the whole town will be totally wiped out. And that,
Right.
I remember that just totally freaked me out. And then obviously everyone was panicking and crying. And I could hear my parents, they were talking about things like poison and what will we do with the girls. So I could hear some things being talked about. And I was thinking, okay, what is the plan now? There is no plan. So if this mob suddenly comes into the inner roads and attacks us, we have no defense, we have no weapons. If you know, people have talked about us being very, we're a very literate community. Our focus has mostly been on books, so we don't have any weapons, apart
Yeah,
from
it
kitchen
is.
knives. So,
It is indeed
so
very shocking. And I want to
yeah.
segue from that to Ruchi because she actually has a personal story around that being, around how her parents were preparing her. So, Ruchi.
Yeah, namaskar everyone. So yeah, listening to this all for last 1 hour. Obviously, we are all going through emotional trauma. It's not something easy for us to listen because it has gone through us. It's not a movie. It's like we have experienced it, especially when we are children. So yeah, January 19th especially is a black day for the whole Hindu community throughout world, where we could not save our Hindus in Kashmir, where Hindus were in minority, and it's a shame for the whole humanity. Where Hindus, if we are in minority, had to leave our homes and we are not safe. So, and coming back to now, what I recall that time, remember that time, which brings me shivers even after 31 years right now. Because I went to back 31 years before, my time changed back, but I was in that phase last 1 hour. I recall that mob of thousands of people surrounding our home and family. And they were not strangers, they were our own neighbors in that mob who were harassing us, abusing us, and asking us to convert to their religion. And I again want to repeat, they were not strangers. They were our own friends and our own neighbors with whom we had been playing. I have seen my own school friends in that mob. So that was scary. If it was some strangers in that mob, we would have thought, okay, maybe we'll go to our neighbors and take some help. But when your own people come to, kill you or ask you to convert to their faith, that is scary. Then you are totally unsafe. And in that phase, and it was not one time, it was like it was happening, like I think it became more intense from 1989 October onwards. That's what I remember. So it used to be every now and then my mother actually from I think 1989 beginning onwards only, we felt very unsafe as Hindus in Kashmir. And my mother had taught me that because some incidents also happened, they took away girls from Hindu families, did all that bad nonsense things which we can't even take on our tongue also. So and my mother was also very young that time, maybe early 40s. So she had taught me, that, and I was the only daughter in my home. I had two brothers, so always the whole attention used to be on me. Like I was feeling like I'm the curse in the home, because my parents both were more worried about me than my brothers. And my mom was to tell me that we have a, if somebody enters our home, and being a Hindu family, we don't even have a sharp knives also to defend ourselves. We don't have any knives, vegetable knives, where we can defend ourselves. So we have nothing to protect ourselves. So my mother used to tell me that we should go to a small storeroom. We used to have a small storeroom in I am born in Srinagar, Kashmir, and in a place, and she used to taught me, we have a storeroom where we used to keep grains for whole winter time. In every Hindu home, it used to be the, like we used to have that to go down kind of thing. My mom says, if anybody breaks our door, we both should only focus us on me and my mother, not on my father, not on my two brothers. It was looking like me and my mother is like something, no reason for the curse on our family. So she had taught me to take that poison. I remember there was something in the cupboard which I never touched, thanks to my Ganpati Baba, which I never touched. But my mother has told me that there's a poison. We both should take it and, die. And that's how we can save the dignity of our family. So that was shivering for me to understand. Like I was feeling that the life of a girl, I was not knowing girls have equal freedom and equal rights like boys, because that is how I was not brought up. I was brought up that I have to die, not my brothers, not my father. Me and my mother only has to die if somebody enters. That was a big trauma in my mind until we actually left Kashmir and reached to Jammu, and then I felt, freedom of, that, oh no, I can live like boys can live, men can live. And these slogans where they used to always come, as I again want to say, from our neighbors, from our friends who were in the mob, they were giving these slogans that you convert or be ready to die. And they used to say, we are interested in keeping only Hindu women safe. We don't want to kill Hindu women. We only want to kill Hindu men. Now at that time I did not understand what all this means. Now you can understand what this mean, why they wanted to keep Hindu women safe. That's the trauma, it will never go away from my mind. That's what I remember when I was in Srinagar, and that's when I remember, what having gone through.
Very sad. And Neeta ji, I would love to hear from you. And I just want to say, Neeta ji is also fighting a fever, so we really appreciate her being here.
Thank you so much, Pushpa. That's okay. This is the least I could do. Obviously, it's not for me or myself. It's for the world to know. It's for the whole all communities across the globe to understand what happened in Kashmir, happening elsewhere too. So I want to give you a little perspective about this. 1990 didn't happen just like that. There was a whole lot of planning that went into it. Obviously, as very naive, innocent, God-fearing, law-abiding citizens of the valley and the country, we never ever paid attention to it. We were just focused on jobs, studies, making our life, and just staying calm. We made so many adjustments and changes in our day-to-day life so that we don't make any statement of that kind, like we were patriotic Hindus. We've never said it, being there in Kashmir. We were law abiding. We never had any issues with any neighbor, be it from the majority community or the minority. So the perspective I want to bring in here is it didn't start in 90, it started in 86, when the southern part of Kashmir, Anantnag, witnessed looting and vandalizing of Kashmiri Pandit homes and temples, uh, specifically targeted. At the time, obviously, we didn't recognize it till 1990 happened, and we could kind of correlate the incidents. And to add to this perspective, I do want to say, because somebody mentioned it on Facebook, that how come Mufti Muhammad Said didn't act? He was actually the chief minister of the state at that time. So you can pretty much understand what was going on there. Late 1988 and 89, we could see clear changes in the population of the majority community. The attire changed, the demeanor changed, talk changed, walk changed. There were verbal, written, telephone threats openly. And I mentioned it to you yesterday also. My dad received several, the contents of which he never shared with me till he passed on to the other world in 2017. He mentioned it to me, what actually was written in those notes, because they were written in Urdu, and they were coming from the area commanders of the terrorist outfits. So what was written in there was, you either get out of here, or you just join us, or we're going to kidnap your daughter, we're going to burn you along with your homes, or you just leave this place. That was what was written in those letters. So I never knew what was the actual content of that letter. So he kept it from me, obviously for a certain reason. He was a dad and he didn't want me to get affected with it. Now, all these posters, etc., they were not only sent to us personally. We had each and every location used to have a what do you call it? A hit list, a list that was posted on a main somewhere on a electric pole. So as to say, in India there are so many, huge those electric poles, and they used to be posted on there, and there used to be a hit list, and you could see your names on there. I couldn't read Urdu, but then people who read it, my father was on there. So you can imagine though I didn't personally read it, but when I was told about it, you can imagine the terror, the kind of, it was agony, it was pain. Even then, obviously, you don't want to leave your home. I just want to correct this once for all. Please stop shaming the victims. Please stop asking questions of the victim. We are victims here. Yes, it took us 30 years to talk about it. Yes, it took us 30 years because it takes a generation to settle down again from what we have been through, after evil we have been through. Our parents had their kids to take care of. Our parents had their parents to take care of. They didn't have time to go out and scream their heads off that this is what happened. They kind of took this time to build our lives. And in the process, they lost their youth. In the process, we lost our youth. But we did not go into something like taking revenge. We didn't pick up guns. We didn't shoot anybody. We didn't kill anybody. We didn't land up in jails. We made our lives. And if you happen to see our Kashmir festival that we recently concluded, a month-long festival, that's where we showcased our strength. That is our strength. Our strength is what we are contributing to the society.
Right.
And that should not be shamed. We are the victims, and we need to stop shaming the victims. I'll talk about it more when you ask. I'm sorry, I went a little over.
No, that's okay. Amrita, do you want to just close off this section? I know you were 4 years old, as you mentioned. You're mute, Amrita.
Hi, namaskar everybody, and thanks Pushpita. Thanks to Kona for inviting me. And I mean, I think with when I was in Kashmir, and when you are of that young of an age, you only remember things that are extremely impactful. And I remember very, very fond memories of snowfall and, playing with my sister and stuff like that. Also, a very strong memory, which was negative. So it's just in scenes that I remember, and this particular scene I just cannot forget. And my sister, when she read an article where I had shared this, and she said, "I remember every bit of this." And but me and my sister have not talked about it ever in our lives to each other. And this is how I don't know why it is like that, but this is how I guess trauma is. What I remember was that my mother was suddenly panicking, and she told me and my sister to go into a corner, to not make a noise, and to shut our eyes. And she put us in a corner of a living room, which was of a house that my dad had newly constructed. It was only like 6 months old, So the windows and everything were yet to be finished, but they had like glasses on them. And I remember that because I was the smallest one, they wanted to protect me the most. So I was in the corner, and then my sister was on top of me, standing, and my mother was on in front of all of us and protecting us. And what I hear, because my eyes are shut, what I hear is that from all the directions of the house, there are like sticks being banged on the windows for so long. I don't even know how long it was. And my heart was racing and I was not breathing. I didn't know what was happening, but I was certainly terrorized. I cannot forget that memory. And that was in February, because my dad refused to leave in January because he wanted to stay. And he said, I'll do anything that is needed. If you want me to convert, I will. And it is that kind of a desperation. Um, and But then he was at work on that day, and when this happened, and we just got death threats the same night, and then my dad kind of gave up, but not really gave up until later on. Um but yeah, that's the memory that I have from Kashmir.
And it's thank you for sharing. It's amazing that you had to go through such a horror. I want to keep stressing you were 4. I couldn't remember what was happening to me at 4 because I did not have such an experience. It's a time of innocence and joy to for a young child to face this obviously scars them for life. You have all talked about buried trauma, and I've heard your stories. And I think that is a very important point because 1990 happened. Unfortunately, one aspect I want to come back to the hidden trauma, but before I do, I want to also talk about the fact that when 1990 happened, there wasn't a lot in your own share experiences. There wasn't a lot of media. Even landlines were scarce. Every family didn't have a landline. It was considered a status symbol. There was obviously no internet. So to see the kind of coordination that you're talking about, that Nijaji talks about, and everything, that how did people know? How did everything happen in such a coordinated manner? Today, in the age of the internet and social media, we find it hard to come up with such a coordinated response. So,
Can I talk
Nijaji,
about?
anything?
Yeah, actually, because I didn't talk about the 1990, January 19, 1990, as we call it the Exodus Day, but it's a genocide day. Um, what happened on those streets that night? I don't want even our enemies to even face that, to be very honest, because it's something which we shudder and shiver just the thought of. Still, I mean, at this age, I still shudder at the very thought of it. So I don't want anybody to go through that. So those mobs carrying those torches and lanterns and screaming their heads off, like "Yahan kya banega, Nizami Mustafa," but relive, galiv, salute, perish, join, or just flee, and leave your woman behind. That they would say, leave your woman behind, and we'll kill the men folk. Those. It was surreal for us, to be very honest. Initially, we didn't even know what is happening. We thought, like, me in my personal space thought, because my dad has gotten threats, so they are coming to kill us. So for me, it was like, okay, they are coming to burn our house, burn us alive. So what is the immediate response? You turn the lights off in your home. What's that going to do? Then you see that your neighbor, next door neighbors who are from the majority community, they are joining this mob too. So you don't have anywhere to even go. And suddenly your phone starts ringing. And these are the colleagues and friends from the majority community, my dad's friends, who are trying to tell him, don't worry, they're not coming to do any harm to you. They're just trying to make a statement. Now, if a person 50 miles from your home is sending you this message, that means that person already knew about it. If a person calling from 100 miles away from your home is sending you this message, telling you to hold off and don't worry, just turn your lights off, this and that, nothing is going to happen, that means they were all in it together. So that should be very clear, because we are being constantly told that it was just a few miscreants. Sometimes when they mention these words, it just boils my blood. They were not miscreants. It was the neighbor. It was my friend, whose attire changed overnight, whose look changed overnight, whose body language changed overnight. It was not just one person, two people, or just a bunch of goons. It was the whole majority community that was out there making a statement, as they said. So 19th January, actually, I had my exam in the morning. I had already taken an exam. I had another exam on 21st. And this didn't stop on 19th January. 20th January night, 21st January night, the same thing was repeated. And we didn't have a choice. My father didn't have a choice but to move me out. He didn't care about his life. He didn't care about my mother. He didn't care about his father. But he cared that my daughter, maybe, she goes to the university, she may be abducted or something. So I was sent out on 23rd of January. Now, another point I want to make here is I didn't leave forever. I had a return ticket because I was supposed to submit my dissertation in March. Everything got left behind. If I was consciously leaving, I would have carried everything with me. The only saving grace was when my parents left in April in a U-Haul meant for vegetables and fruits, the ferry, all that stuff. They left in the back of that U-Haul. They carried a bag full of my certificates. They thought everything was in there. That was the only saving. That was the only thing that they got for me. The only thing that I got with me was a bag full of clothes that to winter wear in Delhi,
Right.
which I
So
wore till they came to Delhi.
So I want to talk about all of you had to flee in some circumstances or another. What followed was almost as bad because the Indian state, which we were all citizens of India. This is independent India we are talking about. And the community then ended, the refugees who made it out, ended up spending the next few weeks, months, years in camps in very poor state, and there was very little to no help. And I know Ruchi has personal experience, and I would want her to share her story from those weeks and months.
Okay. I want to add one more line to previous discussion because I think it's very important to know where we stressed it was not something strangers who came to kill us or who came to, let me use the word, rape us, or who came to take away our girls. They were our neighbors and friends, and their age group used to start from 6 years old. 6-year-old children used to be in that mob. So it's not like some adults used to be in the mob. 6-year-old children used to be in the mob, 6 year, 8 year, 10 year, 12 year, and then forget about, saying 20 years and 40 years old. So those were our enemies. Our own neighbors became our enemies. And when you have a 10-year-old or 8-year-old child throwing stones at your home, then obviously that place is not safe for me as your neighbor. So yeah, obviously then we left before January 19th, actually 1 week before that. We could not stay till then because already there was so much fear, especially in our neighborhood. We lived in an area which was a huge target for these people. We lived in a Hindu minority area, like few homes together in Srinagar, and that was to be mostly targeted by these so-called, other community people. So when there was in that period only there was rape case happened with one family few blocks away from our home, like not very close to our home. One mother daughter was raped, killed, and their father was killed, and their son fortunately was playing outside that time. He was not there, otherwise he would have been also killed. And thanks to Ganpati Baba, he's still surviving. I talked to him maybe like 15 years ago when I was in Jammu. Like in 2010, I met him. He got married. He's married now. He's happy, kind of. Yeah. So that is a time we got shivered. The families who had, especially daughters, young women, like my mother, she herself was a young, that time. She herself had a fear for herself. That's the time we few neighbors planned to leave, and it was a winter break. Our schools are usually off during that time. Winter break. We thought, why don't we leave like couple of, maybe 5-6 weeks, and maybe that time BSF will target them and put them under control. That was our plan to leave, and we just left our bags, couple of bags, handbags. And I still remember that scene. My mother in early morning, like I can say 3-4 in the morning, She locked the door. I still remember that scene only now, and packing few things for ourselves. We are going for 3-4 weeks or 6 weeks at the maximum out of our home. So packing, and then we went in that, kind of, it was not a kind of bus, it was kind of minibus, kind of truck kind of stuff. And we all, and in such a way that we should not make a noise of locking our doors, because our neighbors will come to know. So we are not having fear from outsiders, our own neighbors. So my mother still remembered locked door in such a way that neighbors should not wake up. And then we left, and then we reached, that there was a place, Geeta Bhavan. I think already that moving had started. Jammu people were already knowing that Kashmiri Pandits are coming. It was not something our batch was first. But while we settle down there, we think, okay, we plan to go back, after a few weeks. No, our more and more relatives started coming, more and more. I still remember my aunt, my dad's elder brothers, family coming. Such a devastated. They were living in village, and their whole source was like, farms. Though my uncle was a government employee, but major source was like farms, cows, sheep, hence they were their, major property family members. And remember, after a couple of weeks, my aunt came devastated. And you know what? She was missing her cows. She could not carry cows in that, time in the truck. So that's when and then we started. Then day by day, the hopes, went away that we cannot go back, and our money started, getting over. But I should say one thing on the public platform and global platform. Even though we say communication was not there, which Pushpita said, few times, I don't know then how BJP and Shiv Sena and RSS teams came to know. They were from the day one helping us. I don't know what mode of communication was there, because when I reached Jammu, BJP was there helping us. BJP was not in a power the way right now BJP is famous throughout India or even world. BJP was a small organization that time. BJP, Shiv Sena, Bal Thackeray ji. How did Bal Thackeray ji come to know in January 1990 that if there was not a communication happening? And RSS. These are the people. If you find me bindi on my forehead right now, it's because of these organizations, plus the local Hindu and Sikh community of Jammu. I should not stop, forget to thank about those people. If you see right now bindi on my forehead, and if you see my mom and dad surviving still, and I have to add one more thing. My father, this is his second time, this trauma, because in 1947 he was a child, and that time also it happened same thing. My grandmother that time became a refugee, though they were the landlords in their area. I am from Handwara, Langet, actually in Kashmir. My father is from that, though I am born in Srinagar. My mom is from Srinagar. So my dad has gone through the second. If Amrita remembers this thing, my father also remembers that 1947 era, when my grandmother had taken the small children in her lap and begged. Actually, my father said, and my mom said, my grandmother has begged that time for food in Srinagar itself, Kashmir. So that is the thing, it did not happen to us one time, it happened to my father two times. So that's what
Yeah, it's
happened.
very tragic that your family has had multi-generational experience between just in your own family. We've heard about the 7 exoduses of Kashmir, but in your own family you have seen at least two, and
And my
that is
great
very
grandfather was shot. My great grandfather was shot in 1947.
right. But if we can, I know that then you were talking about the camps, and I think a lot of you have mentioned that you were all living in Kashmir, and even something as simple as the temperature, because the camps were not well outfitted at all. It was mud floors, just a cloth tent. It really affected people as the summer hit. There were the snake bites, the mosquitoes, and how you coped through some of that.
Question for me?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. So yeah, obviously, we are used to live in palaces. Kashmiri Hindus were very well off in Kashmir. We are all rich people, landlords. We have never seen those kind of situation where we had to live in the floors, and we had to sleep on the floors. We are very well off, all
So I think
Kashmiri
you
Hindus.
mentioned your
Yeah,
grandparents were impacted directly, right?
yeah, yeah. My in 1947,
No, no,
I'm from.
in the camps.
Oh, right, right. My grandparents, that generation, whoever was above 60, they could not cope up. Couple of things. We are young, we could cope up changes, hot temperature going from 24 degrees Celsius directly to 44 degrees Celsius. We have not seen 44 degrees Celsius in our life. And Especially we children could cope, or my mother, who parents who are young, but people, grandparents age 60 above, they could not cope up with this high temperature, trauma, shock. Especially, I still remember now some relatives who were at the age of 80s that time. Can you believe an 80-year-old man and woman who is living in their, retirement area in Kashmir, and suddenly you're telling them to live in the tent? How they can, manage all that? You know, and they were also under the fear of getting, abducted. Can you believe a 80-year woman, Hindu woman, was not safe in Kashmir? We had to even move them also. So obviously, it was, I myself have fainted because of that temperature multiple times, and there was no food, there was no proper water, sanitation. There was a lot of, and I had to mention this thing, people above 60 passed away like one after another in first 6 to 7 months. We are always hearing deaths, and that was an indirect murder by these militants, even though
Right.
they were not killed by these militants directly in Kashmir, but that was indirect murder from them. Because in first 1990, I remember so many of my relatives passed away, whether because of trauma, and mostly above 60 years of old. And then we did not had food, we did not have clothes to wear in the beginning. Though I have to admit, my mom and dad are government employees, they still get now pension even at this age. But that time there was no money till the like next few months there. And
Right.
I cannot stop thanking the Shiv Sena, BJP, who gave us clothes to wear. I have myself worn those second-hand clothes. They gave us fans, they gave us food, they gave us buckets, they gave us basic necessities to live. They gave us support, they gave us confidence that don't worry, we are there for you. And because of looking, and obviously Hindus of Jammu, Hindus and Sikhs of Jammu, local Jammu, they gave us confidence that we are there for you, don't worry, if you lost your homes, if you lost your everything, but you did not lose your dharma, you did not lose your religion, you did not lose your faith. That is a strong thing we carried on with us, and you will survive, and we are there for you. And that's how we survived, after reaching there to Jammu.
So I want to segue from there because it was interesting. We've talked about the lack of response from the Indian government. Obviously, you were depending on help from individuals and NGOs. So Shifalika ji had an interesting has a story to tell. Why are we talking about this today? Why have we continued talking about it? She saw firsthand what happened because even then the stories were buried. In 1990, there was hardly any coverage of this. So people in Jammu knew because you were there, but a lot of the rest of India was clueless. And she can talk personally of how that affected her.
Yeah, so listening to Ruchi, obviously all the trauma has come back. It has never left us. So you talked earlier about poor communication, and I just want to go back to the point of how did the locals were so coordinated, but we weren't. So that again tells us the story of how it wasn't just January 1990. This thing has been brewing for a few months or a few years, and it was only us, we didn't know what was going to happen. So when I look back, I feel really stupid and naive that we were the only inhabitants of that place who didn't realize what was going on. With the rest, it was a very coordinated thing, irrespective of, there was no internet, there was no phones, but everybody else apart from us seemed to be very coordinated. Now coming back to when we reached Jammu, again there was zero media coverage, and that is something I feel really strongly about, because we are living this is not, this was in 1947 where things were totally chaotic. This is 1990. There is mainstream media, okay, there's no Facebook, Twitter and things like that, but there is still mainstream media, and there was newspapers, there were local newspapers, but there was zero coverage, absolutely zero coverage, to the sense that in 1990 I was a first year medical student, and I went to Bhopal. For a few months I didn't know if I was going to be able to continue my medical studies, but then eventually we were told that we were being sent in batches to BJP governed states in the country where we would get to play. So me and two of my friends, we were sent to Bhopal Gandhi Medical College, which was very good. But then when I reached there, I realized that the rest of India has no clue of what's going on in Kashmir, because here were three of us, and we suddenly landed one day in a new class, and people were looking at us, and wondering why are these three people suddenly here, what's going on with their own medical college. And so that started off from there, and that's why I feel really sad about it, because no media, there was no media coverage. So rest of the country, which would probably have at least come to our help, or at least there would have been some awakening or understanding of what was going on in Kashmir, that was non-existent. And I felt really upset about it. So we had to really start from point zero. So one person to the next, we had to tell our story to each and every person we encountered since 1990. Whereas if there was some media coverage, at least the rest of the India would have understood what was going on, and at least given us some help, or at least even a kind word. But that wasn't happening, because no one knew what was going on. And this was replicated not just to me, it was replicated all across the country, because we went in different batches to various parts of the country and no one seemed to know. And so that was very shocking.
Yeah, I think that was really shocking because I think as a human, people would have interacted differently and been more accepting had they known the context in which people were suddenly showing up in their cities. That is just the way humans work. But this really goes to show the importance of forums like this, communications like this, and why these stories should not be allowed to die out. Because you guys have talked about multi-generational trauma in your own families, and every time we forget these stories, we hope that we can move on, and I would definitely want to talk about the topic of moving on. But do we
I
really
just
move
have
on?
one
Some of
point,
these
if you
experiences
don't
come
mind.
back to haunt us.
Just one point to make. To Shafalika's point of media coverage and all, local newspapers did carry the threats that these terrorist organizations would have for us. They had the time, energy, money, resources to carry those threats in their local newspapers. The basic fact that women, the minority women, were asked to wear a bindi, and that was all over the place. Those pamphlets and wherever that was circulated, that was okay because they wanted us to be identifiable, targeted, and kind of noticeable, so that they know that these are Hindu girls. Those threats were carried openly. So it's not that media wasn't active there. Media was active to the selective few, or the people that owned the state at that time, owned Kashmir at that time. For us, media was nowhere. So whether it was within JNK or outside of JNK, media was nowhere for us. You're muted.
India had a massive there was a massive print media that existed in the country. There were dozens and dozens of English media. There were local language papers in all parts of the region. So the media did exist. There was a thriving print industry. There was Doordarshan, and there was even the start of what became the private TV industry. Because I think, if anything, I saw a little bit of footage about the Kashmiri camps in something called News Track in those days, which was literally a video news story that was created and sent out on VHS tapes. But I want to talk about, again, it's been 31 years. Many of you have moved on. You are in different parts of the world. Life has moved on. Your families have moved on. But do you ever really move on from something like this? It is great that you're no longer in camps. You have all gone on to build careers, raise families. Some of you have children now in college, but you are still dealing with the impact of something like this. Amrita, I know you have, looks like you wanted to share something about your parents, I think.
Well, I mean, it's like it's very hard when you are a child to understand what's going on, but certainly when my parents had to start over, especially when they had newly constructed house in Srinagar and they didn't want to leave and they had to deal with moving places and coming to Bangalore. That's where I grew up. Um, and we lived in a very small, I wouldn't call it, it's called quarters. They're called quarters and they're like 10 by 10 really. And for me, for us, why it didn't make a difference as kids is because we were given that love, that parents would give to a child. However, there are snippets of those times when you basically are like, this doesn't make sense, like because my mom would, there was a mice who would who would bite her while she's doing dishes. And this was Bangalore, and she didn't know how to deal with mice or cockroaches, because I don't think they were really there in Kashmir. And it was, and then she used to go to the vegetable vendors and say, can you just reduce the price, because we are refugees. And nobody knew about it. Nobody knew and we were in a place where the people didn't understand the language we were speaking. At that time, Bangaloreans really didn't speak Hindi, English, or such languages. They were in Kannada and stuff. So we had to adapt. But having said that, I think our community and my parents especially, also, like, emphasize on education and emphasize on secularism in spite of what happened. I don't have bitterness against any other religion. I have a lot of friends who are Muslims, um, but we have to call the spade a spade, really, that what happened to us was because of what religion we were from. And that it happened because the Muslims wanted the state of Kashmir, Jammu Kashmir. So it also tells me, like, what other people have gone through, who have lost people in their family, like Swapna ji, who was earlier here. And thankfully we did not lose anybody in our house by a terrorist attack. But both my grandparents died of heart attack soon, within 6 months of the forced exodus in Jammu, my dad's side. And I want to just add to Ruchi's comment about the situation in the refugee camps, in the tents. While we didn't personally live there, because we had, like, my dad's sister used to live in Jammu, so she gave us, we could stay with her. But many of my mother's family members were in the tents. And I remember visiting them, not just during the exodus, but we used to go back during summer vacation to my grandmother's house, my mother's mom, um, in Jammu, where house as in a room, that's where they all used to live. My mamas, my uncles, aunts, everybody in that room. And we used to visit the tents in the summer vacation. And I remember using the bathroom in the refugee camps. I cannot forget that. There were this fat houseflies, and they were everywhere. And it was like, it was so bad, because they used to hit your faces. They used to hit your face, and you could hear like a din, because there were so many houseflies in the bathroom. And it was a community bathroom, and it was hideous. And that scene has never left me. And it's just very difficult, because there are many snake bites and stuff that happen. But one thing is for sure, that the sense of community and the sense of value system that we had has not left us.
Yeah, so I wanted to just also talk about that. I heard from many of you that your parents and many of you went through such horrific circumstances, but there was a lot of suppression of these stories. And I want to hear Shafalika ji's view on that, because this ties in with what I hear about PTSD trauma, things coming back to haunt people years, or in your case, decades after they suffered. And I would love to.
Pushpita, I mean, you are right. I mean, things like that. You talked about moving on. So there is a physical moving on, and there's a psychological moving on. So physically, I guess we have all moved on. We live in different countries, but psychologically, there is no moving on, because before we move on, there have to be some things which we have to come to terms with, which we have never come to terms with. And when we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, people think about major disasters like earthquakes and volcanoes and accidents and all that. But post-traumatic disorder also happens because of, it is a very personal thing that can happen to a person, is how you respond to a traumatic situation like that happened to us. So in that sense, I think we are all suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And as a psychiatrist, I have trained in treating PTSD. And when I was doing my training, this thing came back to me, that our whole population, I think, is suffering from PTSD. because one of the things is to come to term, which helps coming in terms with events, is you get a sense of closure. So as individuals, we have this thing that we are living in a safe world, and we are safe because we are living in a safe world. For us, that thing has been shattered forever, because we had a situation where we were not in a safe world and we were very unsafe, and that is going to stay at least with our generation, if not to the next generation. And so the trauma never goes. And one of the things which helps in PTSD is there is some kind of a closure. So events happen, people are prosecuted, or there is some sense that justice has been served, and that helps people move on. People have had parents killed. I've had close family members killed, friends whose parents were murdered. And then there have been no FIRs, there have been no prosecutions, has been nothing.
There has been
So
no
for
closure.
trauma to heal, that has to happen as well, isn't it? So we are in a perpetual state of bereavement. When somebody dies, you go through stages of grief where there's anger, denial, bargaining, but the last step is acceptance, and we are still stuck at the acceptance stage, because we cannot accept that living in a free democratic country, supposed to be, the state is supposed to protect you, and it has failed to protect us. So for us, the trauma, I think, is going to continue for our generations. And one of the things about PTSD is, as a treatment, you try and go back to the place and see what happens. And I heard Jaban Singh ji saying earlier that we should try and go back, maybe that will heal us. And I did try in 2006. I did try to go back, but it was quite a bad experience, because you have to remember, this is a place where people have been killed and our close ones have been murdered. And then you go to a place where you have to stay in a hotel because your own house has been burned. So how can you kind of come to terms with that? And you have people who are looking at you with suspicious eyes, because they think, why have these people come back? So we've had properties burnt, everything has been looted, you go and live in a hotel. That is not going back. I would rather not going back, because that kind of made me relive all my traumatic experiences, all the PTSD symptoms, which I think I have got as well, because chronic PTSD can last decades. And I think we have all got that.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned, that there was no discussion at an official level, there was no justice, and there has never been closure, because I believe nobody has ever been prosecuted or really charged with these crimes. And very unfortunately, the Indian Supreme Court turned down a petition from the community as recently as 2019. It is really sad, because and as a world, we still hunt down Nazis, and it's been way
Yes,
longer since World
yes,
War II.
yes,
The people they hunt down are now in their 80s
yes,
and 90s, but they're still brought to justice, and nobody was brought to
absolutely.
justice for the Kashmir genocide.
Absolutely. So when your own Supreme Court says that they cannot pick up the cases again, and then you are reminded of World War II victims, even decades later, things are happening. And that is really, that's very traumatic for us as a community.
Neerja ji, were you trying to
Yes,
add something?
yes. I was trying to say something as far as closure is concerned. Closure comes when there is some kind of healing from your own self and from your surroundings. Unfortunately, I don't know, somebody's mic is echoing. Sorry. So, unfortunately, healing didn't happen at our own level because so many things happened. You moved out. I mean, you were kicked out. You had to reestablish yourselves. Your grandparents died within 5 months of your exodus because they lost their identity. Mine did. He died on the day of my wedding. So I carry the his death and my wedding anniversary side by side. Celebration is kind of iffy on that day. But those are the real things. So Exodus not only left us without our identity, it left us shattered because not only the people of the state, but the country stayed silent. Um, I think with a little bit of change that has been happening for the past 3-4 years, that I could very easily say that the fellow Indians have started talking. I'm so glad that Pushpita, you are holding this today. It's not me or Shafalik or Amrita or Ruchi holding this webinar today. That's a positive sign. And that probably will bring some kind of healing to us, because the moment you realize that your agony, your pain is not yours only. It is the rest of the world is supportive, as the rest of the world has accepted it. Slow and steady, that healing will happen. And also, as you mentioned, healing happens when these perpetrators are being tried in the court of law, and literally justice is being served to the victim families. We're all victims. I'm not saying that one is less than the other, but there are real victims, 1800 plus families that have lost their loved ones to this barbarism, to their family members have been, you cannot even imagine the way they were brutally murdered. They were raped, um, cut into pieces. I mean, you can only shudder at that thought. But that's where healing comes from. And I do appreciate a lot of people outside our country also being supportive of this and bringing this to the fore and letting the world know. And for us, it's our duty to let the globe, people all over the globe, know that this can happen anywhere. Please, 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 watch out for the signs of these changes that are happening around you, because it doesn't take long. So that's my take on that. Healing will happen, slow and steady. It's happening. We are crying now. I don't think I have cried this much in the past 30 years. So I'm sorry, maybe I took a long time. So please.
Up an excellent point, because it is important to watch for signs. They are very obvious in retrospect, but I think we all have to become better at spotting them as they happen. I also want to just I think I heard when we discussed your stories, it is how incidents can force these discussions years or decades later. Because I think you mentioned your father didn't share the contents of that death threat he had gotten till he was passing away in 2017. And Amrita has mentioned that her parents never talked to her about what they had lived through till I think 2019. And I think the forcing incident was the abrogation of Article 370. And I'm sure there are many other such stories. So it goes to the importance of continuing to be sensitive and thinking about what happened and being aware. But I think it also speaks to how do you guys feel when people ignore your stories or ask you to move on? I mean, that obviously has to be kind of peeling the scab off a healed wound or healing wound. And so that is again something I think as an audience we should all take away and try to be more sensitive towards.
Sure,
I think, yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to just make a small point about, yes, I really thank Modi government to bring it to the forefront so that my parents could finally talk to me about what happened. And of course, it has to also do with their own processing of their trauma. But then certainly when people like you and let's say Jaiban Singh ji, who spoke that we should find justice and happiness in and move forward, there is also an important piece here that the Black Lives Matters movement reminded me of. And I thought that it was very touching and very cathartic for the Black community here when I saw a video where a gathering of Black community was invited, and the whites were apologizing to them, not because they personally wronged them, but they are aware that people of their color did wrong them in the past. So I think that kind of reconciliation has to happen from our Muslim neighbors, like we heard from Ruchi and Nidra ji, that we know that have wronged us in the past, even though right now they might or might not be bitter about it. But I think that needs to happen for us to be able to even consider thinking that the people who were our neighbors, whether we can trust them again or not. And of course we have to also make sure that the justice is served for as far as the murders and the rapes and the loss of property and the forcible the sale of property and stuff has happened, so that we can find our identity back in Kashmir. There is no moving on, there is moving back into Kashmir.
Pushpita, you're on mute.
Okay. Thank you for bringing that up.
And
yeah, sure. One last point, Ruchi.
Yeah. So I just want to end this session, our discussion with this saying that I definitely miss my home in Kashmir. I definitely feel it's so unfortunate that I cannot see my birthplace just because of my faith, because I follow Hinduism, and so I am not safe to see my birthplace, which is so unfortunate. And I want to make a point that Kashmir is a land of Maharishi Kashyapji and descendants of Maharishi Kashyapji. So Kashmir, merge Kashmir, merge means mother and Kashmir, Kashmir. That's what we say, mother Kashmir, merge Kashmir. Merge Kashmir is totally, I feel, that's what I feel like last 31 years. My merge Kashmir is under pain. She has a lot of pain. She is crying and she's missing us. And what is she missing? She's missing these temple bells ringing. My merge Kashmir is missing the Vedic chants happening on the Jahlim River, which used to happen on Shivratris. We used to gather on Shivratris on Jahlim River and do puja. That is missing. And I want to end this, discussion from my side. Obviously, there is no end. I will talk about it throughout my life, because injustice, I have not got justice, especially my parents who are now old. When will they get justice? So I want to end this. What was my mistake? I want to ask this question to human rights or anyone who is watching this. What was my mistake and my community's mistake that I was made refugee? Can anyone answer me this question? What was our mistake that we're denied of our basic human right to live in our home and live in our motherland? Was it because I was Hindu in a Hindu minority place? Was
Right.
that my mistake? So this is a question for everyone. If anyone can help me to answer. Thank you so much.
Very, very, very poignant question. Very important. We obviously don't have all the answers, but I really thank you all for opening up today. This was not easy, and I know. I hope we have not triggered trauma in everybody again. Hopefully, this was a helpful session, and I would just like to say that I really thank you again for sharing, and I hope everybody listening understands why we continue to do these sessions, so that you can all continue to spread the stories, make sure that their stories are not forgotten, and that we learn from them in the future. So